You really think I wouldn't notice? Eleanor's voice was calm, almost eerily so, but the words hung in the air like a challenge. She had set the table meticulously that morning, white porcelain plates lined with silver utensils, crystal glasses catching the sunlight that streamed through the living room windows. The air smelled faintly of fresh baked bread and roasted chicken, a Sunday ritual she had maintained for decades. Melissa, her daughter-in-law, was busy arranging the salad on the sideboard. A forced smile plastered across her face as she glanced at Eleanor with the kind of glance that tried to dismiss her presence, as if she were already invisible. Eleanor's son, Nathan, hovered uncertainly between them, caught in the silent tug-of-war, his hands nervously adjusting the napkins as though he could smooth over the tension with neat folds. Eleanor noticed the way Melissa's eyes darted to the wall clock every few seconds, the way her fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the edge of the table, all the while speaking in tones coated with politeness that had no warmth. Eleanor took a deep breath, her mind tracing back over the last few weeks, remembering how conversations had shifted, how favors she once offered were now met with casual indifference, how her suggestions were quietly ignored, and how small but persistent slights had accumulated into a landscape of quiet betrayal. She poured the iced tea she had prepared into the glasses, moving deliberately slow, each step measured, ensuring she did not give them the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. She watched Nathan's eyes flicker toward her, a flash of uncertainty that made her heart tighten, but also fueled her resolve. He seemed torn between loyalty to his wife and a sense of decency he had not yet fully abandoned. Eleanor let her gaze drift to the framed photographs on the mantel, images of family gatherings, holidays, birthday parties, each smile now tinged with a bitter aftertaste of memory. The room felt simultaneously familiar and alien, as if the walls themselves were complicit in this quiet tension. Her hands adjusted the silver candlesticks, ensuring they were perfectly aligned, the flame flickering gently, as if acknowledging her control over the small world she had crafted. Melissa finally looked directly at her, tilting her head with faux curiosity, asking in a voice laced with condescension, "Are you sure you know how this works?" Eleanor simply smiled, a small, tight smile that held no submission, only measured calm, and replied softly, "I've always known." The words were a shield, a quiet proclamation of presence, asserting that she would not be rushed, that she would not be dismissed, that she had witnessed every shift, every glance, every calculated omission. Outside, the late morning sun moved steadily across the garden, highlighting the dewy green of the lawn and the meticulous rows of flowers Eleanor had planted herself, a silent testament to years of care and order. And yet here inside, the order of her home had been challenged, its harmony disrupted by subtle manipulation and unspoken judgments. She set down the pitcher, folded her hands over her lap, and let the faint sound of a clock ticking fill the silence between them, a metronome marking the careful patience she intended to maintain, a patience honed through decades of observation and restraint, ready to translate into precise action when the moment demanded. The aroma of rosemary and thyme from the roast mingled with the quiet tension, creating a juxtaposition of domestic comfort and undercurrent of confrontation that only she fully perceived. Each breath Eleanor took was deliberate, measured, a reminder to herself that control was hers to claim, not theirs to dictate. She was no longer merely a participant in this household. She was a strategist, silently cataloging every misstep, every subtle attempt at domination, preparing for the moment when calm observation would become decisive, her patience a quiet, unwavering force that promised a revelation Melissa would not see coming and Nathan could not yet comprehend. A force that would elevate Eleanor beyond the narrow expectations that had been imposed upon her, transforming quiet endurance into a position of unmistakable authority and presence. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor where Eleanor sat quietly, her hands resting on the armrests of her chair, fingers lightly drumming as if keeping rhythm with some invisible metronome. The kitchen behind her was immaculate, dishes put away, counters wiped clean, a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, evidence of the small rituals she maintained to bring a sense of order to her days. She observed Melissa moving around the room with careful precision, placing coasters under each glass and adjusting the stack of napkins as though these small actions could establish dominance or control. Nathan hovered nearby, his expression a mixture of guilt and discomfort, glancing at Eleanor and then quickly away, as if unsure how to navigate the tension that had taken root in his home. Eleanor traced the moments that had led to this quiet confrontation, remembering the small omissions, the casual dismissals, the way her advice was quietly ignored, and how subtle manipulations had shifted the household balance without overt conflict. She let her eyes rest on the framed family photographs that lined the wall, each image a memory of laughter, of holidays shared, of birthdays celebrated, and yet each one now carried an unspoken reminder of how those moments had been taken for granted, repurposed as mere backdrops to her perceived irrelevance. She adjusted the throw blanket over her knees, feeling the texture of the fabric and anchoring herself in the physical reality of her surroundings rather than the emotional weight of the betrayal. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the maple tree in the front yard, a familiar sound that brought a fleeting sense of comfort, a reminder that some things remained constant even when human behavior shifted unexpectedly. Eleanor sipped her coffee slowly, noting the temperature, the aroma, the way the cup warmed her hands, small tangible details that grounded her. Melissa glanced over, offering a polite nod, a gesture meant to suggest civility, but Eleanor could detect the calculated nature behind it, the effort to maintain appearances while asserting subtle control. Eleanor's mind cataloged each interaction, each glance, each carefully chosen word, preparing a mental ledger of influence and intention, understanding that her response would need to be equally deliberate. She reflected on the years of maintaining family traditions, of creating spaces where people felt welcome, of organizing events and celebrations that now seemed to have been minimized or overlooked. Eleanor's gaze returned to Nathan, observing the fleeting signs of his inner conflict, the hesitation in his posture, the way his eyes shifted as he measured the implications of loyalty versus truth. She allowed herself a measured exhale, releasing tension slowly, feeling a quiet strength settle in her chest, a calm readiness that would allow her to navigate the subtle power plays unfolding in her home. Each tick of the clock seemed amplified, marking the passage of time and the accumulation of insight, a reminder that patience and observation were tools as potent as any spoken rebuttal. Eleanor set the empty coffee cup back on the side table with deliberate care, signaling that she had taken note, that she was fully present, and that every detail mattered, every gesture accounted for, every silence observed, a silent counterbalance to the orchestrated appearances of control around her, ready for the moment when measured action would turn observation into resolution. Eleanor rose from her chair slowly, her movements deliberate, each step echoing softly on the hardwood floor as she moved toward the bookshelf that held photographs and mementos accumulated over decades. Her fingers lingered on the spines of books, tracing the titles of novels she had loved, journals she had kept, and albums filled with snapshots of birthdays, holidays, and quiet afternoons in the garden. Each item told a story, a testament to years of care and attention, now contrasted sharply with the subtle disregard she had experienced in her own home. She opened a photo album, flipping through the pages, eyes lingering on images of Nathan as a boy, Melissa entering the family for the first time, her face bright with optimism, unaware of the subtle dynamics she would later navigate with careful calculation. Eleanor allowed herself a moment to remember the laughter, the conversations, the way sunlight would stream through the windows during family dinners, casting warm light on faces now tinged with pretense. She closed the album gently, a soft click marking the transition from memory to presence, from past to strategic observation. Returning to the living room, she picked up a letter she had set aside earlier, its envelope crisp, edges slightly worn from handling, the handwriting familiar and intimate. The contents detailed household accounts, receipts, and schedules, seemingly mundane, yet carrying the weight of insight into patterns she had long suspected. Eleanor scanned each line, noting inconsistencies, gaps, and subtle manipulations that Melissa had employed, cataloging them in her mind with methodical precision. Nathan entered the room quietly, his voice tentative, asking about the plans for the afternoon, Unaware that Eleanor had already mapped out her observations and intentions, her awareness stretching across the spatial and temporal dimensions of the home. She smiled faintly, a smile that was calm but heavy with understanding, offering no judgment but conveying a quiet command over the situation. Outside, the wind rustled the branches of the oak tree, sunlight glinting off dew on the grass, a reminder of continuity and resilience. Eleanor moved to the window, observing the garden, the lawn, and the pathway she had maintained with care, drawing a parallel between the order of the outside world and the order she intended to reclaim inside her home. Each breath was measured, each movement precise, as she mentally rehearsed interactions, planned interventions, and anticipated reactions, knowing that patience and observation were as critical as any spoken word. She returned to her chair, seating herself with deliberate poise, fingers folded neatly on her lap, feeling the subtle strength of presence settle around her. The quiet tick of the clock marked the passage of time, each second reinforcing the importance of her vigilance and the clarity of her insight. Eleanor's gaze swept over the room once more, taking in the careful arrangements, the subtle glances exchanged between Melissa and Nathan, the faintest shift in posture or tone noted with unwavering attention. She understood fully that control was not always loud or confrontational. It was measured, strategic, and deeply informed by understanding. The afternoon sunlight shifted across the walls, illuminating Eleanor's composed expression, a calm that held power, a quiet readiness that promised deliberate and considered action, ensuring that each observation, each insight, and each subtle intervention would contribute to reclaiming the equilibrium of her home and asserting her rightful presence within it. Eleanor rose from her chair and walked toward the sideboard, her movements slow and deliberate, noticing the subtle alignment of the cutlery and the slight tilt of the placemats that Melissa had so carefully arranged. She opened the small drawer where she kept envelopes, letters, and notes, sorting through each with a practiced eye, examining dates, signatures, and handwriting for patterns she had suspected but never confirmed. Her mind traced back over conversations, casual remarks, and the timing of certain events, piecing together the mosaic of intention and oversight that had subtly shifted the household dynamics. Nathan entered briefly, carrying a tray with glasses of water, pausing to watch his mother with an uncertain expression, sensing both her composure and the quiet authority in her posture. Eleanor acknowledged him with a nod, no words exchanged, only the silent affirmation of observation and awareness. She returned to the living room, sitting in her favorite chair where the afternoon sunlight streamed in through the windows, illuminating the subtle imperfections in the room, each one noted, each one cataloged. The framed photographs on the mantel caught her attention, moments of laughter and celebration now viewed through the lens of insight, revealing nuances in expressions and positioning that spoke to hidden tensions, unnoticed by anyone else. Eleanor allowed herself a small sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through her hands, a sensory anchor grounding her amidst the mental calculations of strategy and perception. She listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of cars passing by, the rustle of leaves outside, all merging into a background symphony against which she could measure the subtle shifts in the energy of the room. Melissa moved closer, adjusting the tablecloth with exaggerated precision, a thin smile masking impatience. Yet Eleanor perceived the faint tremor in her hand, the momentary lapse in composure, a crack in the facade that Eleanor would note for later. Eleanor's gaze returned to Nathan, who shifted awkwardly, caught between the comfort of habit and the recognition that his mother was not simply reacting but assessing, understanding, and anticipating. The air seemed charged yet quiet, each pause weighted with potential, each glance a data point in Eleanor's mind. She reached for the journal tucked beside the chair, flipping to a blank page, and began making small, concise notes, capturing observations without judgment, documenting subtle behaviors, timing of actions, and sequence of interactions. Eleanor's awareness extended beyond words and gestures, noting the timing of Melissa's movements, the cadence of her speech, the moments of hesitation, all weaving into a comprehensive understanding of intent. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent, shadows lengthening across the floorboards, a reminder of time passing and opportunities unfolding. Eleanor adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, taking a slow breath, each inhalation reinforcing calm focus, each exhalation releasing distraction. She let her mind consider possibilities and outcomes, weighing each with quiet precision, her posture relaxed but alert, a sentinel of observation. Every detail mattered, the tilt of a head, the pause in speech, the subtle shift of weight on a foot. Nothing escaped her attention, and each observation strengthened the quiet certainty that she would navigate the remainder of the day with strategic composure and understated authority, maintaining equilibrium while quietly preparing for the eventual moment of subtle revelation. Eleanor remained seated in her chair, the sunlight now softer, filtering through the blinds and painting stripes of gold across the carpet. She picked up the small stack of letters she had been reviewing, arranging them neatly on the side table, each envelope a fragment of evidence and a testament to the patterns she had been quietly documenting over weeks. Nathan moved across the room, tidying a few items without speaking, and Eleanor noticed the subtle tension in his movements, the hesitation in his gestures, as if he were aware of the underlying scrutiny she exercised. Melissa, busy arranging the silverware once again, paused for a moment, glancing toward Eleanor with a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of apprehension in her eyes, a momentary lapse that Eleanor catalogued with precise attention. Eleanor allowed herself to remember the numerous occasions when she had quietly accommodated, supported, and facilitated the daily lives of her family, the countless small efforts that had gone unnoticed, and she drew a measured sense of resolve from those recollections. She sipped her tea deliberately, tasting the warmth and noticing the gentle clinking of the spoon against the cup, using the sensory details as a grounding point to maintain focus amidst the subtle undercurrents of manipulation around her. Her eyes moved to the clock on the wall, noting each minute as it passed, a silent reminder that time itself was an ally in observing and understanding human behavior. She leaned back slightly, observing Nathan's tentative glances toward Melissa and back to her, the tension in his shoulders, the subtle shift of his weight, all part of a larger pattern Eleanor had begun to discern with clarity. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside served as a backdrop to her thoughts, providing a rhythm that helped her pace her observations and plan the next steps in her silent, strategic approach. Eleanor reflected on her own endurance and the wisdom accrued over decades, realizing that her patience, attention to detail, and calm assessment had created a quiet but undeniable presence in the home, one that could not be overlooked or dismissed. She adjusted the cushion behind her, feeling the texture and weight of it, a reminder of the small comforts she had built into her life that balanced the subtle stresses of observation and anticipation. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully placed object in the room had been catalogued, assessed, and integrated into a mental map of behavior, a map that would guide her response when the time was right. Eleanor allowed herself a small, calm exhale, her awareness stretching across the living space, noting the soft rustle of the curtains, the faint scent of lavender from the candle she had lit earlier, and the meticulous alignment of items on the dining table. She understood that influence could be exerted through measured presence, through quiet observation and strategic patience, and she prepared herself mentally to act with deliberate subtlety, ensuring that each move would be informed, precise, and unassailable, reinforcing her position while maintaining composure and dignity. Eleanor stood by the window, her gaze following the subtle movement of shadows across the lawn as the afternoon light shifted, each tree limb and flower bed rendered in intricate detail by the sun. She could hear the distant hum of cars on the street, the faint chirp of birds hidden in the trees, a symphony of ordinary life that contrasted sharply with the carefully observed tension within her home. She picked up a small notebook from the side table, the leather cover worn from years of use, and opened it to a blank page, ready to jot down observations with meticulous care. Her mind traced back through interactions, noting the subtle cues in Melissa's voice, the pacing of her gestures, and the way Nathan hesitated when questions were directed at him. Eleanor's attention to detail was exhaustive. Nothing escaped her notice, from the slight tilt of a glass to the cadence of a laugh, each signal interpreted as part of a larger pattern. She sipped her tea slowly, letting the warmth settle, grounding herself in the moment while processing layers of subtle behavior and intention. Melissa adjusted the centerpiece on the dining table again, her movements precise yet slightly tense, and Eleanor cataloged the tiny tremor in her hand, the faint narrowing of her eyes, the shift in posture, all minute indicators of the underlying dynamics at play. Nathan walked past, pausing as if to consider approaching, but Eleanor held his gaze with a quiet intensity, conveying understanding without words, asserting a calm authority over the situation. Eleanor moved to the bookshelf, fingers tracing spines of books and albums, reliving moments of celebration, shared meals, and quiet evenings, each memory providing context for the present, highlighting contrasts between past warmth and current manipulation. The sunlight changed as it angled through the blinds, casting long stripes across the hardwood floor, a visual measure of time passing, mirroring the accumulation of insight in Eleanor's mind. She noted each minor action, each exchange, storing them with precision, mentally rehearsing potential responses that would allow her to reclaim composure and presence without confrontation. Her breathing was steady, measured, a rhythm that reinforced her alertness and clarity, while her hands rested lightly on the armrest, poised yet relaxed, a physical expression of her mental equilibrium. Eleanor reflected on the enduring patterns, recalling times when guidance had been ignored, favors repaid with indifference, small slights accumulating into a landscape of subtle disempowerment. She returned to the chair near the window, placing the notebook down with deliberate care, eyes scanning the room, registering every slight movement, every glance, every shift in tone. Each observation reinforced her understanding, each moment of patience accumulating into strategic advantage, a readiness to act with quiet precision when the right opportunity arose. Eleanor exhaled softly, the room still around her, the household carrying on its routines, unaware of the mental calculations unfolding in the calm, measured, and resolute presence of a woman who had transformed observation into subtle mastery, poised to elevate her influence and reclaim authority through insight and patience. Eleanor stood near the window, the late afternoon sun painting the room in warm tones that highlighted the dust motes floating lazily in the air. She moved slowly to the armchair, her hands brushing over the fabric of the cushions as she settled in, feeling the subtle texture beneath her palms, grounding herself in the physical reality while her mind traced the sequence of events and observations of the day. Nathan moved around the room, clearing small items off the table with careful attention, glancing occasionally toward his mother, sensing her composed focus and the quiet command she maintained without raising her voice. Melissa, rearranging the centerpiece flowers once more, paused for a brief moment, as if aware of the scrutiny, the faintest tension appearing in her shoulders, a subtle shift that Eleanor noted with precision. She sipped her tea, noting the aroma, the warmth in her hands, the way the light caught the surface of the cup, small details that anchored her presence and allowed her to maintain clarity amid the undercurrents of household dynamics. Eleanor reviewed the mental notes she had been compiling all afternoon, cataloging gestures, glances, and the timing of words exchanged between Nathan and Melissa, building a map of behavior that revealed patterns of influence and subtle manipulation. She let her gaze drift to the framed photographs on the wall, observing the faces of family members frozen in smiles and laughter, juxtaposed with the tension she now perceived in the room, recognizing the contrast between the warmth of memory and the subtle frictions of the present. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of floorboards, and the distant murmur of traffic outside created a rhythmic backdrop, emphasizing the stillness and patience Eleanor maintained while mentally rehearsing responses that would be deliberate and measured. She leaned back slightly in her chair, feeling the weight of her body supported fully, the calm in her posture conveying presence and authority, her mind active, interpreting and planning. The afternoon light shifted, shadows stretching across the room, reinforcing the sense of time passing and the progression toward moments when her observations could translate into subtle interventions. Eleanor's attention encompassed every minor action, every subtle hesitation, each nuanced expression, reinforcing her understanding that quiet awareness and patience were as potent as any verbal response, preparing her to elevate her influence with precision when the opportunity presented itself. She reached toward a small notepad on the side table, jotting notes in careful, deliberate handwriting, documenting insights, timing, and observations without judgment, each entry reinforcing her strategic approach and deepening her awareness of household dynamics. Eleanor's calm assessment allowed her to maintain a measured presence, ensuring that when the right moment arrived, her response would be precise, authoritative, and unassailable, quietly asserting her position and reclaiming subtle control over the environment without disruption or overt confrontation. Eleanor rose from the chair, her movements deliberate, and walked toward the dining table, the sunlight now soft and golden, illuminating the edges of the carefully set plates and glasses. She picked up a folded piece of paper she had placed there earlier, examining it closely, noting every crease, the texture of the paper, the subtle indentation of handwritten notes that detailed schedules, purchases, and reminders, a meticulous record of household activity she had been quietly tracking for days. Nathan passed behind her, carrying a tray of freshly baked scones, his eyes briefly meeting hers with a hint of apprehension, aware of the calm authority she now radiated without speaking a word. Melissa adjusted a vase of flowers at the center of the table, her movements precise, yet slightly tense, betraying a minor disruption in the composure she had tried to maintain, a detail Eleanor catalogued silently. Eleanor sat down at the head of the table, placing the paper before her and tapping it lightly with a finger, a subtle assertion of presence, a quiet signal that she was aware, alert, and in command of the flow of events. She allowed her gaze to sweep the room, noting the alignment of objects, the spacing of chairs, the slight angles of picture frames on the wall, all forming a detailed mental map of the environment, each element observed for patterns and deviations. She sipped her tea slowly, feeling the warmth and the aroma grounding her thoughts, keeping her focus sharp as she silently traced interactions from earlier in the day, recalling the cadence of words, the shifting posture of Melissa and Nathan's hesitations, each contributing to the broader understanding she had been cultivating. Eleanor leaned back slightly, folding her hands on her lap, feeling the subtle weight of presence, the quiet power that came from observation, patience, and awareness. Outside, the wind rustled leaves in the oak tree, a familiar sound that contrasted with the controlled stillness inside, reinforcing a sense of continuity and resilience that mirrored her own measured approach. She opened the folded paper, reviewing each note, calculating patterns of behavior and opportunity, mentally rehearsing the subtle steps she could take to maintain dignity, ensure clarity, and assert influence without confrontation. Each observation, each moment of silence, each careful gesture formed part of a larger strategy, a blueprint of subtle mastery she had crafted through experience and quiet vigilance. Eleanor glanced toward Nathan, recognizing the mixture of respect and uncertainty in his eyes, and toward Melissa, noting the smallest tremor of hesitation, the fleeting micro-expression that revealed underlying tension. She exhaled slowly, letting the measured rhythm of her breath align with the unspoken cadence of the household, reaffirming her readiness to act with precision, insight, and calm authority. The room remained quiet, each detail captured and cataloged in her mind, her awareness stretching across the entire space, ensuring that every nuance, every shift in tone, and every subtle motion would inform her next moves, reinforcing her position as the quiet yet undeniable center of presence and strategic influence in her home, a poised and composed force that transformed observation into deliberate, understated power. Eleanor stood by the doorway, the soft glow of the late afternoon sun brushing against the walls, highlighting the careful arrangement of the room she had maintained over decades. She watched Nathan quietly, noting the subtle changes in his posture, the hesitation in his movements, the faint tension in his shoulders that reflected his awareness of the atmosphere she had cultivated through patience and observation. Melissa adjusted a cushion on the sofa with precision, her eyes flicking toward Eleanor and then away, the briefest hesitation in her gaze catalogued as another data point in Eleanor's quiet assessment. Eleanor's hands rested lightly on the edge of the table, fingers tapping a slow, steady rhythm that matched the measured tempo of her thoughts, each beat reinforcing focus and readiness. She reflected on the sequence of events from the morning, the interactions, the subtle misdirections, and the careful manipulation she had detected, assembling them into a coherent understanding of household dynamics that would guide her responses. The sunlight shifted further, casting elongated shadows across the hardwood floor, the gentle sway of the curtains in the breeze providing a counterpoint to the silent tension in the room. Eleanor sipped her tea, noting the warmth and aroma, grounding herself while mentally rehearsing the subtle interventions she could employ, all without disruption or confrontation, relying solely on measured presence and awareness. Nathan cleared his throat and shifted his gaze toward the window, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent, while Eleanor allowed a faint nod, acknowledging his presence without breaking the rhythm of her assessment. She glanced toward the mantel, observing the framed photographs of family events, the frozen smiles and laughter now serving as reminders of patterns, lessons learned, and the contrast between outward appearances and underlying behaviors. Each detail, from the angle of a vase to the spacing of chairs, was catalogued, each a clue in Eleanor's comprehensive understanding of influence and perception within her home. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, and the occasional creak of the floorboards created a backdrop for Eleanor's reflections, a steady, predictable rhythm against which she measured subtleties and nuances. She allowed herself a slow, deliberate exhale, settling into a state of calm vigilance, knowing that the quiet patience she maintained amplified her authority more effectively than words or gestures. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, taking in every microexpression, every subtle change in tone, every fleeting glance, reinforcing her strategic awareness and readiness to respond with precision when the moment arrived. She adjusted the notebook on the side table, ensuring it was within reach, her mind recording each observation without judgment, cataloging insight, and preparing for the culmination of subtle, deliberate actions that would assert her presence, influence, and clarity, demonstrating that quiet composure, patience, and meticulous observation were as powerful as any overt declaration of authority within the household she had nurtured and now skillfully guided.